explain all the slides, otherwise people will get really bored. Too bored because it's also when you are working full time for something, it's, you can speak and speak. So I will try to follow what you have initiated to make a very interesting explanation in which we got very good. I'd like to use this photo because I will tell you a little bit afterwards about the ADR. But the most interesting thing is what we try to. We are not trying to remove borders because this would be crazy. Borders in Europe will still last. Nobody is thinking of removing borders, uniform Europe, to have the same legislation, the same. This is impossible. What we try is to cooperate with the European institutions and with the regions to have the better cooperation as possible across the borders while preserving our identity, etc. And of course, guaranteeing peace, because at the end of the day, this is the main idea of Europe, which is to have peaceful relations and have very good cooperation and to get all the best for our citizens. In this sense, this photo is a place which is located in the border of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and was made just a couple of months after the agreement of the Good Friday. So I think it's a very good example of what cross-border cooperation can do. In fact, all the social movements that were working across the border, at that border, at the time of the war, of the civil war, finally they succeeded, and we can tell you, if you go now in this area, we made our General Assembly 2 years ago, you can see that there is a very, not only peaceful relationship, there is a normal relationship. You cannot see the border. There are a lot of people crossing the border every day for working, for business, for whatever. And even there are a lot of services which are provided in a cross-border basis. So for us, this is the best example of cross-border cooperation in Europe. Yeah, this is one of these guys that were thinking about cross-border cooperation well before even nobody was thinking of the European Union. It's Emil Koch. At this time, at the end of the 19th century, the normal relationship of people in Europe across the borders was to make war. This was the normal, typical relationship. But there were some people, some intellectuals at that time that were thinking that the border is not the place where you go to the end, but it's the place where you can grow, that you can go to grow together. And this is really the idea of Europe. So we feel very proud that not only big statesmen and the big countries, they were making Europe, but people who were close to the border, mayors, organizations and citizens, they had this vision of a peaceful Europe cooperating across the borders at that time, and it was not so easy. Today it's quite normal to think like that. 100 years ago was another story. So Emil Koch is one of them. This is not very famous. He was a writer and he was writing theater and things like that, but he was saying a couple of things which were really interesting, and we have recovered this message for us. Well, exactly, this is the point, that the normal cooperation across the borders was quite abnormal up to the 50s, which was just to make the war, to try to get the resources of the other, to put your army over there. But even if these wars were created in the capitals, at the end those who were paying the bill were the border regions. So most of the European border regions, they know very well about the war, and that's why one of the founders of the European Commission, of the European Community, was saying that the borders are the scars of history. This is probably a very good definition about that. In any case, the process of cross-border cooperation began very at the same time that the process of European construction. And we were in parallel. If the European idea was made at the beginning of the 50s in the Treaty of Rome, at the same time the first Euro regions were created. In fact, the first one is formally created in 1958. So that means we were more or less in parallel. And most of these first Euro regions, they were created in the western borders of Germany. First of all, because in the eastern borders of Germany it was not very easy to make Euro regions at that time. But in the western borders, along the Rhine River, where too many wars were taking place in the 17th century, in the 18th, in the 19th, and of course in the 20th century. The mayors across the borders, they decided that they have to make bridges across with France, with Switzerland, with Belgium, with the Netherlands. How they did it? Just creating small businesses or small services and even promoting that the young people were crossing the border to go for dancing or whatever, and to make weddings and to have cross-border couples, because at the end your children will be cross-border and they will never fight with the brothers. And this seems to be a funny story, but this was at that time was a very serious one. So all these mayors, they were creating bars for young people during the weekend, or during the Patriot Day or whatever. And then the police also were making their contacts in order to fight against crime across the border, and the enterprises were created across the borders, and then the Euroregions, and then the network of Euroregions, etc. This was a laboratory for European integration, and then this idea was taken on board by many other borders in the continent. And as the many countries were joining the European Union at the same time, more and more Euroregions or any similar structure were created. But even there is a very interesting moment, which is 1990, where there is a change of the regimes in Central and Eastern Europe. And in this case, most of these countries, they wanted to join the European Union. And it was not the case that they joined the Union and then Euroregions were created. No. Already in 1990, most of these countries created their Euroregions well before they joined the Union. Actually, 14 years before, it's minimum. Because looking at the Western European experience, many of these Central and Eastern countries, and even was the case in some countries in the Balkans, they created this accession. So we find, and today they are very good partners for us, because they were our colleagues when they were small guys working in the Euroregions. Now some of them are ministers and things like this. So this is very interesting. Not only the institutional network that you create, but also the network that is created between people. Because when we talk about cross-border cooperation, it's mostly about the relationship between people. This is the best value for cross-border cooperation. The same can be said in Northern Europe, in the Mediterranean, and even in the Caucasus, between Armenia and Georgia. There is a Euroregion called Euro-Caucasus. It was created 3 years ago, just 1 year after the war was there, particularly in Georgia. We created this Euroregion with the support not only of the Western Europe countries, Germany particularly, but also the Russian Federation was there. So it was a big step towards a normalization of the relationships in the Caucasus area, which is very complicated, as you may know. And the same can be said about Latin America or Africa. In the last 3-4 years, there has been an extraordinary development of cross-border cooperation structures, particularly in Central America as a whole, in some specific borders in South America, and even in Western Africa, promoted by the African Union, European institutions, and I'm proud to say that the Association of European Border Regions was not the leading force, but one of the driving forces to promote this cross-border cooperation. Go on some figures. This is about the tradition in Europe in the last 50 years. You can see that in the 60s there were around 20 active border regions, and now we have more than 200 structures. Regional governments around, but also around 150, 160 Euroregions. Now even we have these EGTCs, which is a new type of cross-border cooperation structure within public law that is growing and growing, and I think there are now around 28 created. So probably there's border regional governments in border regions. Probably we can put in this figure not 200, but probably 250 structures are promoting and very active in Europe, which is a very nice number. We have Euroregions, we have working communities, we have informal structures like these cross-border initiatives cabinets, we have the EETCs, European Grouping of Territorial Cooperation, we have the EGC, which is the Council of Europe version of the EETCs, which is coming from the first idea, because Council of Europe was very much promoting cross-border cooperation in 1980 with the Madrid Outline Convention and additional protocols. And now it is under discussion, the third additional protocol, which is to create these European groupings of cooperation. That means there will be cross-border structures that can be created in the area of the Council of Europe, which is 47 member states, not the 27 plus 1, as it is the case of the European Union. And then we have the macro regions, which is another story, complicated in some cases when you consider this as a structure, but as has been said very well before, it is about the strategies. Macro regions is not about creating the structures and an office and people there. So then some of the citizens will be very angry because we are creating the structures and structures and structures, But macro-region is an idea of creating a development strategy for a whole area, the Baltic area, the Adriatic area, the Danube area, etc. So actually it's very interesting, this question of macro-regions, because the European Union is supporting these macro-regions, but with 3 no's. No allocated funds for these macro-regions, no new legal framework for that, and no staff, offices and structures, but a strategy. Then other programs which are sometimes disconnected can be united into this macro-regional strategy in order to make a better use of funding, staff, etc. So this could be a very stimulating framework to develop particular cross-border cooperation initiatives within a given macro-region. We find it a very interesting process. Regarding the ADR, these are some figures. We were founded in 1971 by 10 crazy guys who met in the area of the Rhine River, some mayors from the German side, the French side, saying we have to support the European integration process by creating these kind of structures. So in this time it was they were looking crazy for projects in order to finance small initiatives. Then in the 80s we began to be listened by the European institutions, and then the first programs and instruments were created. In the 90s, then the initiative Interreg came. Now it's one of the most successful programs in the European Union, and today we have around 100 members, and not every structure is member of us, but we can talk about that there is a generalization of cross-border cooperation all over Europe. In fact, we represent the interests of cross-border regions towards the Council of Europe, the European Union, and the national governments, and of course we don't defend the interests of only of our members when we discuss with the Commission, but we try to represent, not to represent, to defend the interests of all border regions in Europe. So that's why every time that I have the chance to make this presentation, I always ask border and cross-border regions, if you are not a member of ADR, you are very much welcome to do it very soon, because we will be stronger. Well, this is a map that we try to organize every 3-4 years. I have given some copies over there, because this map was finished in this version in December 2011. We were making a review in January, and we made the first printing in February, and it's already old because there are structures being created all the time. In this map, just so you can see, the red areas are members of our association. The green are border and cross-border regions which are not members yet. The yellow and orange are big cross-border cooperation structures. The orange are members, the yellow are not yet. And the frames are the EGTCs, these structures for cross-border and interregional cooperation created by European law in 2006. And yeah, we try to update it, but every time that we update it, it is old. Because we have some new members, or because there are new structures, because there are more EGTCs. But this means that this is a very, very dynamic process. In fact, we consider that the most dynamic process in the whole European Union and far beyond is cross-border cooperation. In fact, if you look at the border between, for instance, Russia and Ukraine, where there is nothing to do with the European Union, the whole border is full of Euro regions. There is the whole borderline from the Azov Sea up to Belarus is full of cross-border cooperation structures, even if there is no Interreg program to support this area. And even if in the neighborhood program these areas are not eligible, it doesn't matter. The governments of the regions in this area, they decided that they would create something like the Euro regions. They decided to put the name Euro regions, and there are very interesting programs being developed there. In fact, our last General Assembly was celebrated last September in Kursk, in this area, which was a big challenge for them and also for us, even in the Caucasus and all over. So this is really growing a very, very interesting process. Here I have put, just for you to see how is the meta network of structures which are cooperating. This is the area around here, and imagine only in this part of Europe how many structures are being developed. Here they are represented border regions. Okay, so you can send them our contacts for. But it's true because it's not the same to create a Euro region between France and Germany than between the countries in the Balkans, especially in some areas. Here, even the challenges are very strong, but the benefits will be fantastic if they are used to incorporate each other. So I think it's a very interesting process, and I think we could do a lot of things. You have a lot of experience cooperating with all your neighbors in this area, and together we could help a lot others, especially in the borders of Bosnia, which is, from my point of view, the most difficult area. Even within Bosnia, some cross-border cooperation sometimes could be possible. I find it very interesting. We are talking that it's not only a structure, but especially it's a name, an area, and a mission. And this is the case in most of the cases where Euro regions are created. The Euro region becomes a brand that is the European brand in the area, close in a very really bottom-up process, where the citizens, the majors, where the lowest level of the political level, but even enterprises, universities can take part. And they have to find the common points, to try to develop all the synergies, etc. Of course, without Interreg, it would have not been very easy to keep these programs, to keep these structures, and of course to keep all the projects. But there is life after Interreg. Actually, there is a lot of other possibilities. But first of all, Interreg has been the real driving force for all this. When I say Interreg, for those who doesn't know, Interreg was a small program, now it's an initiative of the European Union, where to promote territorial cooperation, and 75% of Interreg is devoted to cross-border cooperation. Well, this is just to show, first every time that there was the possibility to organize a cross-border structure, you needed to have a bilateral, trilateral agreement. So you had as many agreements as borders. That means it was a big mess, because you had to, one agreement was not the same than other one, except in the case of the Madrid Outline Convention from the Council of Europe, where more or less you could follow the similar processes. But anyway, it was very difficult. You even needed bilateral or trilateral agreements. Then now we have this EGTC, which is member states of the European Union are forced to include this in their legislation. And that means that most of the structures made with the previous thing, they had to be organized as private law bodies, which is not exactly the best. Then with the EGTCs, with the European Grouping of Territorial Cooperation, you can create cross-border structures within public law. And all of them are more or less following the same regulation, because it's a general common regulation for the whole European Union. The only problem we find is that still there are some fine-tuning. Actually, there is a revision ongoing, because there is question related to the staff, the question related to the taxation of the staff there. There is also some restriction for the participation of the external borders of the Union. This is going to be solved in the revision of the regulation. And we find it a very promising instrument to develop cross-border cooperation in a deepest way. We could talk for hours also about this, but someone is interested, we can talk later about that. Then I will show you a couple of arguments that we are using. We defend that there has to be a positive discrimination for border areas, because normally border areas are out of the places where decisions are taken. So we need positive discrimination. Otherwise, the big transport routes are going to be thought, and they're going to be implemented following the logics of the capitals, and not the logics of the border areas. That's why we need this positive discrimination. Otherwise, there will be a territorial dumping, and this dumping would be of border areas, which are peripheral, normally peripheral, with lack of services, infrastructure, etc. The 50 years of cross-border cooperation shows that if we do this at the end, there is an enormous benefit not only for the border areas, but for the participating countries as well, and then for the European as a whole, because the best money you can use in Europe right now is to invest in border areas. I'm completely sure, of course. It is clear that this is a new dimension, because we are making cooperation with our neighbors, but from the point of view of the capitals can be considered as international relations. And then we have themes of sovereignty and things like that. But it's clear for the colleagues from Istria and the colleagues from Slovenia and the colleagues from Trieste, I'm sure that when you are from Friuli, when you are cooperating, you are not doing international relations, you are doing neighborhood relations, which is another story. nothing to do with big declarations and sovereignty or whatever. It's a question of developing together all the synergies, which is the difficulties, many. Mistrust by central governments, because these guys are doing things outside the borders. And of course the asymmetries. There are differences in the economic structure, in the capacities, there are many asymmetries, but this is a trick to try to live with that and to work with that. And it works. Well, this is more about that. We like to insist, especially to central governments, that normally they are the enemy, friendly enemy, because they say these people are overcoming borders. When we talk about cross-border cooperation, the intention is not to create new administrative level, it's not to talk about competences. We only want some delegation of competences to work, but that's it. And of course, cross-border cooperation is probably the best example of multi-level governance, which is being developed by the European Union as the way to govern the Union in the next years. Cross-border cooperation is using multi-level governance. You cannot do anything, especially if there is a difference between languages across the border. You cannot do good projects if there is no training on the language of the neighbor, because everybody wants to speak English, but not everybody wants to speak the language of the neighbor. So this is the first one. But you have all this, and we have plenty of examples. This is one of the examples. In the case of socio-economic added value of cross-border cooperation, you can find here 6 arguments that can be also illustrated by specific projects, which you can imagine. If you have a cross-border cooperation, you can mobilize the potential of both sides, you can open new labor market, you can make more participation for economic and social actors, etc. And of course, if it is successful, you can even develop better transport infrastructure across the border, which is the main challenge. Not everybody is following this. This is also a challenge for networks, because we have to fight with